Dad said I wasn't his real daughter until he needed a kidney. I was 12 years old when I first heard the words that would change my life forever. My dad was in his study, the door ajar, talking on the phone with my Uncle Mark. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I swear. I had just come downstairs to get some water, and his voice echoed down the silent hallway of our home in Portland, Oregon. "You know she's not really my daughter, Mark," he said, and the glass I was holding nearly slipped from my hand. The DNA test I did when she was born proved it, but Rebecca doesn't know that I know. I figured it was better to leave it that way. It's easier for everyone. I stood frozen there, barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, trying to process what I had just heard. My heart was beating so hard I thought he might hear me through the wall. 12 years of my entire life, and I wasn't his daughter? How was that possible? Who was my real father? And why had my mother never told me? I went back upstairs in silence, like a ghost, and locked my bedroom door. I sat on my bed, trembling, not from the cold, but from a feeling I couldn't name. Betrayal, maybe. Confusion, definitely. And a deep ache that felt like it was tearing something inside me apart. In the days that followed, I started to see everything through different eyes. The way my dad, Richard, avoided looking at me directly during dinner. How he never showed up to my school performances, always making up some last-minute meeting. How my mother would get tense whenever I mentioned wanting to talk to him about something important. All those little rejections I had excused as "he's just busy" or "dad's tired from work" took on a new, dark meaning. He wasn't just busy or tired. He simply didn't care about me the way a father should care about his daughter, because in his mind, I wasn't really his daughter. I didn't confront my mother right away. Part of me was afraid of the truth, afraid that hearing it out loud would make it all the more real. So I kept that secret like a heavy stone in my pocket, carrying it with me wherever I went. The years passed, and I became a quiet, observant teenager, always trying to be good enough, smart enough, useful enough for Richard to notice me, approve of me, love me. But nothing I did was ever enough. When I got straight A's in my freshman year of high school, he just nodded and said, "That's the least that's expected." When I won the school's top science student award, he didn't come to the ceremony. He said he had a conference in Seattle he couldn't miss. My mother went alone, smiling for the photos as I held my certificate, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. She knew. She had always known. My younger brother Danny, on the other hand, was the absolute favorite. Everything Danny did was celebrated as if it were an Olympic achievement. He got mediocre grades and was treated to special celebratory dinners. He played football for the school team, and Richard never missed a game, shouting from the stands like a proud father. I understood why now. Danny was really his son. Danny had his blood. I was just the child of my mother's betrayal, a living reminder of something my father had chosen to forgive publicly, but had never truly gotten over. At 16, I finally gathered the courage to confront my mother. It was a Saturday afternoon. Richard had taken Danny to a baseball game in Eugene, and the two of us were home alone. She was in the kitchen baking a cake, her favorite way of dealing with stress, when I sat down at the table and said simply, "I know Richard isn't my biological father." Her hands stopped mid-motion as she was cracking an egg. The shell fell into the bowl, and she just stood there, staring at the mess as if she didn't know what to do. When she finally turned to me, there were tears in her eyes. "How did you find out?" she whispered. "I heard him telling Uncle Mark 4 years ago." Her expression shifted from shock to horror. 4 years? You've carried this alone for 4 years? She came to sit beside me, trying to take my hand, but I pulled away. I wasn't ready for comfort. I was ready for answers. "Who is my real father?" I asked, my voice coming out colder than I intended. His mother took a deep breath, wiping the tears with the back of her flour-dusted hand. "His name was Thomas Mitchell. We worked together at an accounting firm in Seattle before I married Richard. We had a brief, intense relationship, but he wasn't ready to settle down. When I found out I was pregnant, he made it clear he didn't want to be a father." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Richard and I were starting to get serious around that time. I told him the truth, that I was pregnant with another man's child. I thought he would leave, but he said he loved us, me and you. He said he would be your father in all the ways that mattered. But he did a DNA test, I said, feeling anger start to boil inside me. He didn't trust you. And then he spent my entire life treating me like I was a burden, an obligation he had to accept but never really wanted. My mother closed her eyes and more tears streamed down her face. I didn't know about the test until years later. I found the results in one of his locked drawers. When I confronted him, he admitted he'd done it when you were a baby, but he said he had already committed and wasn't going to back out. I thought that over time he would love you like he loves Danny. I thought the love would grow. But it didn't, I finished for her. No, she admitted, her voice breaking. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger, that I didn't leave when I realized how differently he treated you. I kept hoping things would get better, that he would change, but she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. We both knew Richard would never change. That conversation didn't bring the relief I had hoped for. If anything, it just made everything heavier. Now I knew for sure it wasn't my imagination. It wasn't paranoia. The difference in treatment was real, intentional, and had lasted my entire life. More importantly, my mother knew and had chosen to do nothing. That night, alone in my room, I made a decision. I couldn't change the past or make Richard love me, but I could control my future. I decided that as soon as I finished high school, I would go to a college far away. I would work hard, become independent, and build a life where my worth didn't depend on the approval of a man who had never wanted me. For the next 2 years, I focused completely on my studies. I got the best grades in school, joined every club that could strengthen my college applications, and worked part-time at a coffee shop to save money. Richard rarely acknowledged my existence, except to sarcastically comment on how I studied too much or was wasting my youth on books. When I received acceptance letters from several universities, including a full scholarship to Northwestern University in Chicago, my mother cried with pride. Richard just asked how much it was going to cost him. "Nothing," I replied calmly. "I got a full scholarship. I don't need your money." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. "Chicago is a long way away," he said, and for a moment I thought I detected a trace of genuine concern. But then he added, "Your mother will miss you. Not I'll miss you, not we'll miss you, just her. Always just her." "I know," I replied, looking at my mother who was trying to smile through her tears. "But I need to do this for myself." Danny, who was 15 at the time, was the only one who seemed genuinely upset about me leaving. Despite everything, my brother and I were close. It wasn't his fault he was the favorite, and to his credit, he always treated me with love and brotherly respect. "You'll come back for the holidays, right?" he asked the night before I left. "I'll try," I promised, but we both knew it would be difficult. Chicago was over 2,000 miles from Portland, and plane tickets were expensive. The truth was, I wanted to stay away as much as possible. At the airport, my mother hugged me as if she would never see me again. Danny gave me an awkward teenage hug and made me promise to call every week. Richard stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, staring at some point above my head. When it was finally my time to go through security, he stepped forward. For an absurd instant, I thought he was going to hug me, tell me he loved me, wish me luck. Instead, he held out his hand for a formal handshake, as if I were a business acquaintance. "Good luck," he said mechanically. I looked at that outstretched hand, at the man who had raised me but never loved me, and I felt something inside me finally break free. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was acceptance. Acceptance that I would never be good enough for him because the problem was never with me. The problem had always been his and his inability to love a child who didn't share his DNA. I shook his hand briefly, without emotion. "Thank you," I said, though I wasn't sure exactly what I was thanking him for. For giving me a roof over my head? For not treating me even worse than he already did? For teaching me, through his rejection, that I needed to be strong and independent? I turned and walked through security without looking back. I didn't cry on the plane. I didn't feel the heart-wrenching pain I expected to feel leaving my family behind. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Hope that in Chicago, far from the shadows of the family secret that had defined my childhood, I could finally discover who I really was, who I could become when I wasn't constantly trying to prove my worth to someone who would never give me the approval I craved. The next few years at Northwestern were transformative. I threw myself into my biology studies with a passion I didn't even know I had. I made friends who became my chosen family, people who loved me for who I was, not in spite of who I was. I worked in research labs, published my first scientific paper as an undergraduate, and began to build a life that was completely, unquestionably my own. I only returned to Portland for Christmas, and even then, for shorter and shorter periods. The visits were tense and uncomfortable. Richard and I barely spoke, existing in a tacit agreement of polite indifference. My mother tried to fill the silence with cheerful chatter about recipes and the weather, while Danny did his best to ease the tension with funny stories from his college. In my senior year, I decided to apply to medical school. Not because I wanted to impress Richard, but because I had discovered a genuine passion for understanding the human body, its complexities, its vulnerabilities, its incredible capacity for healing. I was accepted to the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in Baltimore, once again with a significant scholarship. When I told my family the news over the phone, the response was predictable. My mother cried with joy, Danny shouted with excitement. Richard said, "Medicine is a long and expensive road. I hope you know what you're getting into." "I know exactly what I'm getting into," I replied calmly. I moved to Baltimore without going back to Portland first. I told myself it was because I didn't have time, that the medical program started immediately after my graduation. But the truth was, I didn't want to see Richard. I didn't want that cold, formal farewell again. I didn't want the reminder of his indifference as I began one of the most important chapters of my life. The years of medical school were brutally difficult, but I loved every moment. I worked endless shifts at the hospital, studied until my vision blurred, and slowly became the doctor I dreamed of being. I specialized in nephrology, the study of the kidneys, fascinated by how these small but vital organs kept the entire body in balance. During this time, my calls home became increasingly rare, once a month, if that. My mother always answered, updating me on Danny, who had married his high school sweetheart, on the neighbors, on her garden. She rarely mentioned Richard, except to say he was fine, working hard, the same empty generalities as always. I was in my second year of residency, 28 years old, when my phone rang at 3 in the morning. I had just gotten off a 36-hour shift and was dead tired, but I answered when I saw it was my mother. "I need you to come home," she said, without even a hello, her voice strange, too controlled. "What happened?" I asked, sitting up in bed, instantly alert. "It's your father, Richard." She paused, and I could hear her take a deep breath. "He's in the hospital. Kidney failure. End stage. The doctors say he needs a transplant urgently or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. As a doctor training in nephrology, I knew exactly what end-stage renal disease meant. Without proper treatment, without a new kidney, Richard would die. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. The man who had spent my entire life reminding me that I wasn't really his, that we didn't share blood, that I was the product of my mother's betrayal, was now dying from a failure of an organ that I, as a nephrologist in training, was learning to treat. "When did this happen?" I asked, my voice professional and clinical. "He's been feeling sick for months, but you know how he is, stubborn, refusing to go to the doctor. He finally collapsed at work last week. The tests showed his kidneys are functioning at less than 15%. He started dialysis, but the doctors say it's just a temporary fix. He needs to get on the transplant list, but it could take years." Years he probably didn't have, I thought, but didn't say it out loud. "And Danny?" I asked. "My brother would be the obvious choice for a donor." "Danny was tested. He's not a match. He has a different blood type. The doctors say the chances are minimal." There was a long silence, and then my mother said the words I knew were coming. "They want you to get tested too." I flew to Portland 2 days later, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me needed to see this with my own eyes. I needed to see the man who had rejected me my entire life, now vulnerable, sick, possibly dying. It wasn't compassion I felt. It wasn't filial love. It was morbid curiosity mixed with something darker I didn't want to name. The Oregon Health and Science University Hospital was perched in the Portland Hills, overlooking the city. I found my mother in the fourth-floor waiting room, looking like she had aged 10 years since I'd last seen her. She hugged me tightly, trembling, and whispered, "Thank you for coming. Thank you." Danny was there too, looking lost and scared. He held me tight. "Thank God you're here. I feel so useless, not being able to help." "You're not useless," I assured him, though I understood his frustration. Organ compatibility is a genetic lottery. It's not your fault. Richard was in room 312, hooked up to machines that beeped softly, measuring every heartbeat, every breath. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the illness. His skin had a yellowish tint, and I could see the characteristic swelling from fluid retention. When I walked in, he opened his eyes and looked at me. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Shame, perhaps, or embarrassment? But then, his expression settled into the familiar mask of polite distance. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse. "Mom told me about your situation," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, professional. "How are you feeling?" "How do you think?" he said, with a hint of his usual irritation. "I'm tethered to a machine 3 times a week to keep my blood clean because my kidneys decided to quit. How would anyone feel?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, observing the man who had never managed to love me, now forced to depend on medicine, technology, and possibly me to survive. My mother came into the room behind me, her hands clasped nervously. "The doctor said you would be a good candidate to be tested as a donor," she began carefully, "because of your age, your health, and, well, you know, the family connections." Family. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Richard looked away, staring out the window. I turned to my mother and said calmly, "I need to speak with you and Richard, alone." Danny, ever perceptive, immediately stood up. "I'll go get coffee for everyone," he said, quickly leaving and closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with 28 years of unspoken truths. Finally, I looked directly at Richard and said, "Before we consider any tests, we need to have a conversation we've been avoiding for decades." My mother paled. "Maybe this isn't the best time." "There is no better time," I interrupted. "You're asking me to potentially donate a vital organ." "I think I deserve complete honesty before I make that decision." I turned to Richard. "I know you did a DNA test when I was a baby. I know you found out you weren't my biological father. And I know you've spent my entire life treating me like I was a mistake, an unwanted obligation you had to accept." Richard closed his eyes, but didn't deny it. My mother began to cry silently. "I heard you telling Uncle Mark when I was 12, I continued, my voice surprisingly steady. "I spent 16 years wondering why I wasn't good enough, why you loved Danny but couldn't love me. Now I know it had nothing to do with me. It had to do with the fact that I didn't carry your DNA." Richard opened his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw something genuine in them. It wasn't love, but it was something closer to acknowledgement, to admission. "I thought I could get over it," he said quietly. "When your mother told me she was pregnant with another man's child, I truly believed I could love you as my own. But when you were born, when I held you and looked at you, all I could think was that you were living proof of her betrayal, that every time I looked at you, I would be reminded." "So you did the test?" I finished. "I did the test," he admitted. "Part of me hoped that maybe the doctors were wrong, that maybe there was a chance you were mine. But the test confirmed it, and I had already publicly committed, already registered you with my name, already told everyone you were my daughter. I felt trapped." "Trapped," I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. "You felt trapped by an innocent child who didn't ask to be born into this situation." "I know it's wrong," he said, and for the first time, I heard something that sounded like remorse in his voice. I know you were blameless, but I couldn't separate the anger I felt at Rebecca from the way I looked at you. And then Danny was born, and he was mine, no question, and I saw how different it was, how easy it was to love a child who was really mine. The tears I had held back for years finally began to fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of rage. Rage for all the lost years, for all the times I tried to be good enough, smart enough, useful enough, never understanding that nothing I did would ever matter. You destroyed my childhood, I said, my voice trembling. You made me feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with me. And the saddest part is that I would have forgiven you if you had been honest, if you had come to me when I was old enough to understand and explained the situation. I would have understood. But you chose to punish me in silence for something that wasn't my fault. My mother moved toward me, trying to hug me, but I took a step back. And you, I said, turning my anger on her, you knew. You saw how he treated me, and you did nothing. You chose your marriage over protecting me. I was scared, she whispered, scared that if I forced the issue, he would leave us, scared of being a single mother with no financial support. I know those were selfish excuses, but I was afraid. I shook my head, suddenly tired of all the pain, all the anger, all the weight of family secrets I had carried for so long. Now you're asking me to donate a kidney to him, I said, looking between them. You want me to give up a part of my body, to risk my own health and medical career, to save a man who never wanted me? I wouldn't expect you to, Richard said suddenly, his voice hoarse. I have no right to ask anything of you, not after how I've treated you. I looked at him, surprised by the admission. Your mother insisted on calling you, he continued, but I told her it would be unfair. You don't owe me anything, less than nothing. There was something surreal about that moment. After a lifetime of seeking some acknowledgement from him, some validation, I was finally getting it, but it came in the form of a release. He was giving me permission not to help, freeing me from any filial obligation. And strangely, that raw honesty meant more to me than any forced display of affection could have. I need time to think, I said finally. I need to talk to the doctors, understand the risks, consider the impact on my career. This isn't a decision I can make based on emotion. My mother nodded, wiping her tears. Richard just stared out the window again, as if he had already accepted his sentence. I spent the next 3 days talking with Richard's nephrologists, reviewing his charts, fully understanding his condition. His kidney failure was the result of years of uncontrolled diabetes and neglected high blood pressure, basically the result of decades of neglecting his own health. Ironically, if he had taken better care of himself, he probably wouldn't be in this situation. I also consulted with my own doctors and mentors in Baltimore. As a nephrology resident, I understood the risks of organ donation better than most people. I knew that most donors live normal, healthy lives with one kidney, but I also knew there were risks, small but real, of complications, and that donating a kidney as a doctor early in my career could impact my health insurance and future opportunities. Danny came to visit me at the hotel where I was staying. We sat in the small lobby cafe, drinking bad coffee and trying to process the impossible situation our family was in. You don't have to do this, he said firmly. No one would expect you to, not after how he treated you. I know, I replied, but I'm considering it anyway. Danny looked at me, surprised. Why? Not for him, surely. I took a deep breath, trying to articulate thoughts that were still forming. It's not for him, or at least not mostly for him. It's for me. I've spent my whole life letting his rejection define who I was. I let it turn me into someone who was constantly trying to prove her worth, and I'm tired of it. I paused, stirring my coffee. If I don't get tested, if I let him die when I could possibly help, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I became as cruel and unfeeling as he was to me, if I allowed the anger to turn me into someone I don't want to be. That's not fair, Danny protested. You don't owe him anything. I know, but maybe I owe it to myself. I owe it to myself to do this for the right reasons, not out of obligation or guilt, but because I choose to be the bigger person, because I choose to be better than he was. Danny shook his head, admiration and concern mixed in his expression. You've always been better than him, always. On the fourth day, I went back to the hospital. Richard was alone this time. My mother had gone home to rest. He looked even worse. The swelling increased, his skin more sallow. I came to tell you my decision, I announced without preamble. He straightened up a little, bracing himself. I'm going to do the compatibility testing, I said. If we're a match, I will donate a kidney. The surprise on his face was genuine. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, I interrupted. I'm not doing this because you deserve it. I'm not doing it because we're family or because I feel some filial obligation. I'm doing it because I'm a doctor, and doctors save lives when they can, even the lives of people who have hurt them. I paused, making sure he was really listening. But I need you to understand something. If we do this, if I donate a kidney to you, it doesn't erase the past. It doesn't suddenly make us a happy family. It doesn't mean I've forgotten or forgiven how you treated me for my entire life. It just means that I've chosen not to let your cruelty turn me into someone cruel too. Richard nodded slowly, tears starting to well in his eyes for the first time I could remember. I understand, and even if it means nothing to you right now, I have to say it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the years I wasted, for all the pain I caused. You deserved better. You deserved a real father. Yes, I agreed simply. I did. The raw honesty of the admission seemed to shock us both, but it was true, and we both knew it. There was no point in pretending otherwise now. I did the compatibility tests that afternoon. Blood was drawn, tissues were analyzed, genetic profiles were compared, and then we waited. The results would take a few days, and I used that time to briefly fly back to Baltimore, check on my apartment, and talk to my supervisors about a potential medical leave. My best friend from residency, Marcus, met me for dinner the night before I flew back to Portland. He was one of the few people who knew my whole complicated family history, and he could read my expression better than anyone. "You're really doing this," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Looks like it," I replied, pushing food around my plate without really eating. "If we're a match. And if you're not?" "Then the problem solves itself," I said with a bitter half-smile. "He goes on the national transplant list and waits like everyone else. Statistically, it could take years he probably doesn't have." Marcus studied me for a long moment. "You know you don't have to be the hero in this story, right? You could just say no, and no one who really knows you would judge you for it." "I know," I admitted, "but I think I need to do this for me, not for him. I need to prove to myself that I'm not defined by his rejection, that I can be compassionate even when it's not deserved, that I can choose to be the bigger person without expecting anything in return." "That's very zen for someone who's clearly terrified," Marcus pointed out gently. I laughed, because he was right. I was terrified. Terrified of the surgery, of the risks, of what it would mean to give a piece of myself to someone who had never given me anything but rejection. But I was also determined. The results came in 6 days later. I was back in Portland, staying at the hotel again, when my phone rang. It was Dr. Helena Patterson, the hospital's transplant coordinator. "I have your test results," she said, her voice professional but warm. "You are a perfect match, a 6-for-6 antigen match. It's extremely rare, especially considering you're not genetically father and daughter." The irony was not lost on me. I, the daughter, who wasn't really a daughter, was a perfect match for the man who had rejected me my entire life. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. "What are the next steps?" I asked, my doctor voice taking over. Dr. Patterson explained the process in detail. More tests, psychological evaluations to ensure I was donating for healthy reasons and not under coercion, full physicals, and then, if everything was approved, the surgery would be scheduled. "I want to be clear about something," I said before we hung up. "I need it on the record that I'm doing this as a voluntary, informed donor, not as an obligated family member. I fully understand the risks and consequences. Understood, she replied. In fact, that makes you an even more valuable donor. It means your decision is entirely your own, free from family pressure. That's exactly what we look for. I told Danny the news first, who hugged me tight and whispered that I was the bravest person he knew. Then I told my mother, who cried tears of relief and gratitude, holding my hands as if I might disappear. And finally, I went to Richard's room. He was awake, staring at the ceiling, hooked up to the dialysis machines that kept his blood clean. When I walked in, he turned his head slowly. "We're a match," I announced without preamble. "A 6-for-6 match. The doctors say it's one of the best they've ever seen." The emotion that crossed his face was too complex to name. Relief, certainly, but also something that looked like shame, or maybe renewed guilt. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice cracking. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "We've already established the terms. I'm doing this for my own reasons, not because I expect gratitude or a magical transformation in our relationship." He nodded, discreetly wiping his eyes. "Even so, thank you. You're giving me a second chance at a life I don't deserve." "No," I agreed calmly, "you don't, but I'm going to give it to you anyway." The following weeks were a whirlwind of medical preparations. I went through countless tests, consultations with surgeons, and conversations with psychologists who wanted to ensure I fully understood what I was doing. Every professional asked me the same thing in different ways. "Are you sure? Do you feel pressured?" And each time, I answered with the same quiet certainty. Yes, I was sure. No, I didn't feel pressured. Yes, I understood the risks. And yes, I still wanted to proceed. During this period, something strange began to happen. Richard started talking to me. Not deep, emotional conversations, but small moments of genuine connection we had never had before. He would ask about my residency, about the cases I was seeing, about my plans for the future. For the first time, he showed genuine interest in who I was, not just polite tolerance for my existence. It wasn't love. It wasn't love yet, but it was something more than the icy indifference that had defined our relationship for 28 years. It was acknowledgement. It was respect. It was, perhaps, the beginning of something that might eventually look like connection. One evening, about 3 weeks before the scheduled surgery, he asked me to stay after my mother and Danny had left. "I want to tell you about your biological father," he said suddenly. I froze. In all these years, no one had ever volunteered this information. "You don't have to," I began, but he shook his head. "I do. You deserve to know where you come from, especially if you're going to give me a piece of yourself. It's the least I can do." He took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. "Thomas Mitchell. He worked with your mother at the accounting firm in Seattle. From everything your mother told me, he was smart, ambitious, charming, but he was also immature, not ready for responsibility. When she told him she was pregnant, he disappeared, literally took a job in New York and cut off all contact." He paused, looking at me with an expression that was almost gentle. "Your mother tried to contact him a few times over the years. He never responded. Not when you were born, not when you were a child. It was like he erased you both from his life completely." The sting of that rejection should have hurt me, but strangely it didn't. Maybe because I had already processed the rejection of one father. The one from a man I had never known seemed almost irrelevant by comparison. "Why are you telling me this now?" Richard looked down at his hands, at the tubes connected to his arm. "Because I spent years blaming you for his mistake, blaming you for your mother's choice, and I've realized recently how absurd and cruel that was. Thomas Mitchell abandoned you before you were even born. I had 28 years to get to know you, to love you, and I wasted every single one of them because of wounded pride and misdirected anger." He finally looked me in the eye. "You deserved better from both your fathers, the biological one and the one who chose to raise you, and I'm sorry that neither of us measured up." I didn't know what to say. After a lifetime of silences and half-truths, this raw honesty was almost shocking. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "It means something that you're finally being honest with me." "It's the least I can do," he repeated. And in that moment, sitting in that sterile hospital room under the harsh fluorescent light, we began the long, painful process of perhaps becoming something more than strangers connected only by legal paperwork. Hey, if you've made it this far, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being with me on this journey. I know these stories stir things up, make us think about family, forgiveness, and how far we'll go for people who have hurt us. I'm curious to know, have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision involving a family member who wronged you? Sometimes we hold these stories inside for so long that they become too heavy. If you want to vent in the comments, I read every single one with care. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this, share it with them. Sometimes we just need to know we're not alone in the struggles we face. I'll be back here, telling the rest of this story. There's still a lot to come. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 6:30, at the same hospital where Richard was being treated. I flew back to Baltimore for a few days before the procedure, getting my affairs in order, talking with my supervisors, preparing myself mentally and physically for what was to come. Marcus drove me to the airport when it was time to return to Portland. "Last chance to change your mind," he joked, but I could see the genuine concern in his eyes. "I'll be fine," I assured him. "And Marcus, thanks for being the brother I chose, since the universe gave me such a complicated situation with the one I was born with." He hugged me tight. "You're the strongest person I know. You're going to come out the other side of this even stronger. I know it." The night before the surgery, my whole family gathered in my hotel room. Danny brought Chinese food, my mom brought flowers, and surprisingly, Richard showed up in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse who had agreed to bring him over for a few hours. "You shouldn't be out of the hospital," I scolded, but I was secretly touched by the effort. "I wasn't going to let you go through this tomorrow without seeing you first," he said simply. We ate together, a dysfunctional family trying to pretend at normalcy for a few hours. Danny told funny stories about his job as a gym teacher. My mother made everyone laugh with an embarrassing story about burning a cake for a neighbor's birthday. And even Richard contributed a few memories from his early days as an engineer. It was surreal, this semblance of a functional family. Part of me wanted to resent it, to ask why we couldn't have had this years ago when I really needed it. But another part of me, the part that was learning to let the past be the past, just accepted the moment for what it was. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. When it was time for Richard to go back to the hospital, he asked to speak with me alone for a moment. The others discreetly filed out into the hallway, leaving us alone. "If anything goes wrong tomorrow," he started, but I cut him off. "Nothing is going to go wrong. I'm young, healthy, and the surgeons are excellent. Statistically, the chances of serious complications are minimal." "Even so," he insisted, "if something happens, I need you to know that the greatest shame of my life isn't my failing kidneys. It's wasting 28 years with an extraordinary daughter because I was too bitter and proud to see what was right in front of me." My throat tightened. "Richard, let me finish," he said softly. "You've become an incredible doctor. You're going to save lives, make a difference in the world, and you did it all on your own, without any support from me. In fact, in spite of me. That makes you so much stronger and more remarkable than I will ever be." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to suddenly call me Dad or pretend we have a relationship we don't. But I want you to know that I recognize what I did wrong. And if we both make it through tomorrow, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be, if not a father, then at least a friend. Someone you can count on, someone who supports you, someone who finally sees you for who you really are." The tears I'd been holding back started to fall. They weren't tears of forgiveness or reconciliation. They were tears of release, of finally letting go of the weight of years spent trying to earn the love of someone who didn't know how to give it. "Thank you for saying that," I replied when I could speak. "I don't know if we'll ever have a normal relationship, but I appreciate the honesty. It's more than you've given me my entire life." He nodded, wiping his own eyes. "It's a start." After he left, I was alone with my thoughts. I called a few friends in Baltimore, checked on the supportive messages that had come in throughout the day, trying to quiet my mind that insisted on cataloging every possible surgical risk I knew so well as a doctor. Finally, late that night, I managed to sleep, too exhausted to worry anymore. The morning of the surgery arrived cold and gray, typical for Portland in late autumn. I got to the hospital at 5:30, still dark outside, and was taken to the pre-op area. My mother and Danny were there, dressed in hospital scrubs, allowed to stay with me until it was time to go into the operating room. "You're the bravest person I know," Danny said for the 10th time, holding my hand. "I'm not brave," I corrected gently. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." My mother kissed my forehead, whispering words of love and gratitude. And then the medical team arrived, checking my vitals, asking the standard questions, preparing me for what was to come. Dr. Sarah Chen, the surgeon who would be performing my nephrectomy, came to introduce herself. She was a small, compact woman with steady hands and kind eyes. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Nervous," I admitted, "but ready." "Good. Nervous is normal. It means you understand the seriousness of what we're about to do. But trust me, you are in excellent hands. I've done this procedure over 200 times. You'll wake up with one less kidney, but your whole life ahead of you." I nodded, comforted by her quiet confidence. When the time came, I said goodbye to my mother and Danny, goodbye to the nurses who had been so kind, and was wheeled into the operating room on a gurney, watching the ceiling lights pass like blurry stars. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took hold was thinking, this is for me, not for him, for me. And then everything went dark. I woke up hours later in recovery, disoriented and in pain. My left side throbbed where they had removed my kidney, and my mouth was dry as cotton. A nurse quickly appeared at my side when she saw me stirring. "Welcome back," she said calmly. "The surgery went perfectly. Your kidney is already in your father and working beautifully. You did an amazing thing today." Father? The word still sounded strange, but I let it pass. My family appeared shortly after, their faces full of relief and joy. Danny told me Richard's surgery had also been a success, that the kidney had started producing urine almost immediately, an excellent sign. "He's asking for you," my mother said gently. "He wants to know when he can see you." "Tell him I need a few days to recover," I replied, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube, "but that I'm glad he's okay." The next few days were a blur of pain, medication, and slow recovery. As a doctor, I knew the recovery trajectory in theory, but living it was completely different. Every movement hurt, every deep breath was an effort. But gradually, day by day, I got stronger. Richard was also recovering in the same hospital, a few floors above me. The doctors were amazed at how well the transplant had worked. His numbers improved dramatically, the swelling went down, the yellowish tint of his skin began to fade. It was like he was coming back to life before everyone's eyes. On the 5th day after the surgery, when I could finally walk with limited assistance, I asked to be taken to his room. It was time to see the man who now carried a piece of me inside him. He was sitting up in bed, looking better than I had seen him in months. When I came in, supported by a nurse, he tried to stand, but I stopped him with a gesture. "Stay where you are. We're both still recovering." I carefully sat in the chair beside his bed, every movement cautious. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, two survivors of complex surgeries, connected now not just by shared history, but by literal biology. "How are you feeling?" he finally asked. "Like someone who just donated a vital organ," I answered honestly. "Sore, tired, but the doctors say I'm recovering well." He nodded, and I could see conflicting emotions passing over his face. "I don't know how to properly thank you for what you did, giving me not just a second chance at life, but your own health, your own body." He trailed off, struggling for words. "It's a gift I'll never be able to repay." "I'm not asking for repayment," I said calmly. "We've already established that. I did this for my own reasons, because I chose to be the bigger person, because I chose not to let our complicated past dictate my actions in the present." He wiped at his eyes. "Even so, it's changed my life, in more ways than you can imagine." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious. Richard took a deep breath, as if about to jump off a cliff. Being this close to death, realizing I could die without ever having truly known you, without ever having been a father to you, it made me reevaluate everything. All the choices I made, all the priorities I set, all the stupid pride that kept me from loving you the way you deserved. He leaned forward, earnest. I'm not asking for instant forgiveness or a magical transformation of our relationship, but I am asking for a chance to get to know the incredible woman you've become, a chance to maybe, eventually, earn the right to be in your life, not as an obligation, but because you choose to have me there. I looked at this man who had caused me so much pain, who was now literally alive because of me, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet at least, but it was the possibility of forgiveness. It was the door cracking open to something new, something neither of us could have predicted. A chance, I agreed finally, but you need to understand it's going to take time. I'm not going to pretend that years of rejection disappear because we shared a surgery. It's going to be a long and sometimes painful process of rebuilding something from scratch. I understand, he said quickly, and I'm prepared for that, for however long it takes. We sat together in a comfortable silence for a few more minutes before the nurse came to get me, saying I needed to rest. As I was leaving, Richard called out to me. "Your real father? Thomas Mitchell?" he said hesitantly. "If you want, I can help you find him. I have some information your mother gave me over the years. I know he works in New York. I know the company name. If you want to meet him, or at least know more about him, I can help." The offer surprised me. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know your whole story," he said simply. "And because I finally understand that trying to erase or ignore Thomas Mitchell doesn't make him any less real. He's a part of who you are, genetically at least, and if knowing him helps you understand yourself better, then I want to facilitate that." I looked at this man who was slowly, painfully transforming into something more than the distant, cold father of my childhood. "Let me think about it," I said finally. "Right now, I need to focus on getting better. But thank you. Thank you for finally seeing me, for finally acknowledging that my story is more complex than you were willing to admit for all those years." He nodded, and as I left, I heard him whisper, "Thank you for giving me this chance." I spent another week in the hospital before I was discharged. My recovery was going well, the doctors pleased with my progress. Richard would be discharged a few days after me, his body adjusting remarkably well to the new kidney. Before leaving the hospital, I had one last conversation with Dr. Patterson, the transplant coordinator. "You know you did something extraordinary, right?" she said, reviewing my final charts. "Not just medically, though the transplant was a tremendous success, but personally, most people in your situation, with your history, would not have done what you did." I needed to prove something to myself, I admitted. I needed to know that I was better than the resentment and the anger, that I could choose compassion even when it wasn't easy or expected. She smiled. "You're going to be an amazing doctor. You already are, actually. The empathy and strength you've shown through this entire process are exactly what medicine needs." I flew back to Baltimore a week later, still recovering but able to travel. Marcus picked me up from the airport, and when he hugged me, he held me with extra care, aware of the still healing incision on my side. "How are you, really?" he asked as we drove back to my apartment. "Physically? Mending. Emotionally?" I paused, considering. "Surprisingly at peace. I feel like I've closed a chapter that's been open my entire life. I don't know exactly what the next chapter will bring, but for the first time, I feel like I have control over how it will be written." In the months that followed, I focused on my recovery and on getting back to work. The doctors were impressed with how quickly I healed, attributing it to my young age and excellent overall health. Within 3 months, I was back to my full residency schedule, working long shifts and caring for patients with the same dedication as before. Richard and I began to speak regularly, short calls at first, just checking in on each other's recovery progress. But gradually, the conversations deepened. He would ask me about my cases, genuinely interested in the technical aspects of nephrology. I would ask about his work, discovering sides of his personality I had never seen before. It wasn't a traditional father-daughter relationship. Maybe it never would be, but it was something, a connection being built brick by brick, based on honesty and mutual respect instead of obligation or DNA. One night, about 6 months after the transplant, Richard called me with a different tone in his voice. "I found Thomas Mitchell," he said without preamble. "He still works in New York, now as the CFO of an investment firm. He's married, has 2 kids, boys, I think. They're 10 and 8. My heart sped up. For months, I had thought about my biological father in the abstract, but hearing concrete details about his life made him suddenly very real. "Did you speak to him?" I asked. "No, just did some research. But I have his email address, office phone number. If you want to make contact, I can give you the information. Or, if you'd prefer, I can make the first contact. Pave the way." I thought for a long moment. Part of me was curious, wanted to know about the man who had given me half my DNA, but nothing else. But another part of me, the part that had grown and healed over the past several months, realized I might not need that answer. "Hold on to the information for now," I said finally. "Maybe one day I'll want to meet him, or at least know more about him. But right now, I'm focused on building the relationship we have, on healing the wounds that can be healed. Thomas Mitchell made his choice almost 30 years ago. I don't need his validation to know who I am." I could hear the smile in Richard's voice. "You are so much wiser at 29 than I have ever been in my entire life." "I learned from the best," I replied, and for the first time, there was no bitterness in the statement, just truth. The first Thanksgiving after the transplant was unlike any other our family had ever experienced. For the first time in years, I flew to Portland not out of obligation or guilt, but because I genuinely wanted to be there. My mother prepared an elaborate feast, as she always did, but this time the atmosphere was different, lighter, without the underlying tension that used to permeate our family gatherings. Danny and his wife Jennifer were there, and they were excited to announce they were expecting their first child. The news filled the house with joy and excitement, my mother already planning how to turn the guest room into a nursery. But it was Richard who surprised me. In the middle of dinner, he gently tapped his glass, asking for everyone's attention. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, his voice a little shaky. "This year, I have so much to be thankful for. My health, thanks to the extraordinary generosity of someone very special. The family gathered around me, and the chance to finally start getting things right after years of getting them terribly wrong." He looked directly at me. "I spent most of your life, daughter, treating you like you were a burden, making you feel like you didn't belong, like you weren't good enough. And the truth is, you were always too good for me. You were always stronger, more compassionate, wiser than I could ever hope to be." Tears started to well in his eyes, but he continued, "You saved me when you had no reason to. You gave me not just a kidney, but a lesson in humanity that I will carry for the rest of my life. And I want everyone here to know that my greatest regret isn't getting sick, but wasting so many years being cruel to the best person I know." The table fell silent, everyone processing this rare moment of emotional vulnerability from a man who had spent decades keeping everyone at arm's length. My mother was crying silently, Danny had an arm around Jennifer, and all eyes were on me, waiting for my reaction. I stood up slowly and walked to where Richard was sitting. He looked up, uncertain, perhaps afraid I would reject him publicly as he had rejected me privately for years. Instead, I leaned down and hugged him. It was awkward at first. Decades of distance don't disappear in a single moment. But then I felt his arms come around me, holding on as if to something precious he had almost lost. "Thank you," I whispered in his ear. "Thank you for finally seeing it, for finally trying." When we pulled apart, we were both crying. The rest of the dinner was a genuine celebration, not just of the food or the holiday, but of second chances, of healing, and of a family slowly learning how to love each other despite its flaws. Later that night, after the others had gone to bed, Richard and I sat on the back deck, wrapped in blankets against the November chill, watching the stars. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a long, comfortable silence. "Have you really forgiven me, or are you just being polite to keep the peace?" The question took me by surprise with its direct honesty. I thought carefully before answering. Honestly, I don't know if I've completely forgiven you. There are still days when I remember some moment from my childhood, some specific rejection, and it hurts as if it happened yesterday. I don't think that kind of pain ever completely goes away just because we decide to move on. I paused, choosing my words with care. But I am in the process of forgiving. I am actively choosing not to let that pain define who I am or how I relate to you now. And I think that's more valuable than an instant, superficial forgiveness. It's real work, real progress. Richard nodded slowly, absorbing my words. That's fairer than I deserve, and more than I hoped for. You know what helped me? I continued, realizing that you were carrying your own pain all that time. The pain of my mother's betrayal, the pain of your wounded pride, the pain of being reminded every day of something you wanted to forget. It doesn't excuse how you treated me, but it helps explain it. And understanding isn't the same as forgiving, but it's a step in that direction. He was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his own hands. You know what's funny? Terribly ironic, but funny? I spent your whole life focusing on the fact that you didn't have my DNA. But now, I literally carry a piece of you inside me. Your kidney is keeping me alive every second of every day. It's like the universe was saying, see, DNA was never what mattered. Love, compassion, sacrifice, those are the things that truly connect us. I smiled in the darkness. The universe does have an ironic sense of humor. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Richard asked suddenly. Of course. When you were 6, you had that school play, remember? You were a tree in the play about the environment. I vaguely remembered. Richard hadn't attended, claiming an important meeting. I went, he admitted softly. I got there late and stood in the back of the auditorium where no one could see me. And I watched you up there, in that ridiculous tree costume your mother had made, saying your lines with such seriousness and dedication. And I felt such tenderness, such pride. For a moment, I forgot all the anger and resentment, and I just loved you. My throat tightened. Why did you never tell me? Why didn't you let me know you were there? Because as soon as the moment passed, the anger came back, the resentment came back. And I was ashamed that my ability to love you was so intermittent, so conditional. So I pretended I had never gone. It was easier to maintain the distance than to admit I was struggling with my own feelings. He turned to look at me directly. But there were other moments too. When you graduated high school as valedictorian, I was there in the back. When you won that science award in your freshman year of college and sent a picture, I put it in my office drawer where only I could see it. I watched your life from a distance, proud but unable to let you know, because that would mean admitting I was wrong, that I had always been wrong. Tears were streaming freely down my face now. That makes it all even sadder, I said. To think that you felt those things but chose to hide them. That we could have had a real connection all those years, but your pride wouldn't let you. I know, he said, his own voice cracking. And if I could go back and do it differently, I would do everything differently. But I can't. All I can do is be honest now and hope that it's not too late to build something real. I reached out my hand and took his. It was strange, this physical touch between us. Decades of distance making even simple gestures fraught with meaning. It's not too late, I said firmly. It's different than it could have been, certainly, but it's not too late to build something new. We sat like that for a while longer, hand in hand, two survivors of our own complicated family history, watching the stars and the steam of our breath in the cold air. When we finally went inside, he stopped at the base of the stairs. "Good night, daughter," he said, and for the first time, the word didn't sound forced or distant. It sounded genuine. "Good night, Richard," I replied, not ready to call him Dad yet, but maybe one day. Maybe. I flew back to Baltimore with something I didn't have when I arrived: peace. Not the peace of solved problems or completely healed wounds, but the peace of knowing I was on the right path, that healing was possible even when it seemed unlikely. My residency continued to be intense, but I found myself approaching my work with a renewed passion. Every patient with kidney disease I treated, every conversation about transplantation I had, now carried a personal weight. I understood from both sides, as a donor and as a doctor, the magnitude of what it meant to give and receive an organ. One day, about 8 months after the transplant, I was examining a new patient, a woman named Patricia who was in advanced stage kidney failure. She had a 25-year-old daughter who was being tested as a potential donor. Dr. Morrison, Patricia said during the consultation, using the name I had legally changed to a few years prior, leaving Richard's surname behind but keeping my mother's as a middle name. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," I replied, closing her chart and giving her my full attention. "You have a scar," she pointed gently to my left side, where a thin line was visible under my white coat. "It's from a donor nephrectomy, isn't it? I recognize it because I've been researching the procedure." Instinctively, my hand went to the scar. "It is. I donated a kidney 8 months ago." "To a family member?" she asked carefully. "To the man," I corrected, the language still complicated. "Our relationship was complex, but yes, to family." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said, "My daughter, Sarah, is willing to donate to me, but I feel so guilty asking this of her. What if something goes wrong? What if it affects her future health, her ability to have children, her career? How can I ask her to make such an enormous sacrifice?" I sat in the chair beside her, no longer a detached doctor, but someone who intimately understood her struggle. "Can I tell you something? When I decided to donate, it was not an easy decision. I had to weigh all the risks you're mentioning. I had to consider the impact on my medical career, on my future plans. And yes, there were moments of doubt and fear." I paused, collecting my thoughts. But I also realized something important. Your daughter isn't being forced into this. She is choosing. And there is power in that choice. There is dignity in consciously deciding to do something difficult for someone you love. Don't take that away from her. Patricia wiped at tears that were beginning to form. But what if she regrets it? What if years from now she looks back and resents me for asking? "Then you have honest conversations about it now," I advised. "Make sure she fully understands the risks, the long-term implications, that she isn't doing it out of guilt or obligation. And then, if she still chooses to do it, trust that choice. Respect her autonomy and her courage." I leaned forward. "You know what I learned from donating my kidney? That sometimes the greatest acts of love aren't the ones we do for people who love us perfectly in return. They're the ones we do because we choose to be people who love generously, even when it's hard, even when it's scary. Your daughter is giving you an incredible gift. Let her give it." Patricia nodded, absorbing my words. A few months later, Sarah would donate a kidney to her mother, and they would both recover beautifully. And I always felt honored to have been a part of their journey, to have used my own experience to help another family navigate such complicated waters. Marcus noticed the change in me during this period. "You're different," he observed over coffee after a particularly long shift. "More, I don't know, more at peace with yourself?" "I think I finally stopped trying to prove my worth," I admitted. "I spent so long trying to be good enough, smart enough, useful enough to earn love that I didn't realize I already was all those things. Donating that kidney wasn't about proving anything. It was about choosing who I wanted to be." "And who do you want to be?" he asked with a smile. "Someone who acts with compassion even when it's hard. Someone who understands that family is more complicated than DNA or surnames. Someone who can forgive without forgetting, can move forward without erasing the past." I took a sip of my coffee. "And you know what's liberating? Realizing I don't have to choose between being the victim of my story or pretending nothing happened. I can be both. Someone who was hurt, but who chose not to let that pain define me." Marcus reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're one of the strongest people I know. And I'll be honest, I'm a little in love with this version of you that's no longer carrying all that weight." I looked at him, surprised. Marcus and I had been close friends for years, but he had never hinted at romantic feelings before. "Marcus," I began, not sure how to respond. "You don't have to say anything right now," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know that I see you, all of you, the broken parts and the healed parts, and I think it's all absolutely incredible. When and if you're ready to consider something more than friendship, I'll be here. And if you're never ready, I'll be here too, because your friendship alone is worth everything. I smiled, feeling my heart warm in a way it hadn't in a long time. I might need some time. I'm still processing so much, rebuilding so much. I've got all the time in the world, he assured me. The following spring, I got a call from Richard that I wasn't expecting. I want to do something, he said without preamble, something I should have done a long time ago. What? I asked, curious and a little wary. I want to officially adopt you, legally. I know you're an adult, that it technically makes no practical difference, but symbolically, I want there to be legal documents that say you are my daughter, not by accident or obligation, but by conscious choice. My choice this time, not just circumstance. I was speechless for a moment. Richard, you know you don't have to do that. We're already building a relationship. Legal paperwork isn't going to change anything. It will change it for me, he insisted. I spent 28 years rejecting you based on a DNA test. I want to spend the rest of my life affirming that you are my daughter, by choice, by love, not by genetics. Let me do this, please. I thought about his offer, about what it would mean to have that official acknowledgement after a lifetime without it. Okay, I agreed finally. If that's what you want, if it's important to you, then yes. Thank you, he said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. Thank you for giving me that chance. The adult adoption process was surprisingly simple. A few forms, a court appearance, and suddenly I had legal documents declaring Richard Morrison as my father by adoption. It didn't change anything practically. I still used my own surname, still lived my own life. But symbolically, it meant everything. It meant acknowledgement, acceptance, choice. The day we received the final documents, Richard called me. It's official now, he said, and I could hear him smiling. You're legally my daughter. And this time, it's not because of lies or secrets or obligation. It's because I chose you. Because you were always my daughter in the ways that really matter. It just took me too long to realize it. Thank you, Dad, I said, using the title consciously for the first time in my adult life. Thank you for finally choosing to see me. I could hear him crying softly on the other end of the line. No, thank you for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it, for saving me when you had every reason to let me die, for giving me the chance to finally be the father I should have been from the start. 2 years after the transplant, my life had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. I completed my nephrology residency with honors, accepted a fellowship position at a prestigious hospital in Boston, and was beginning to build a career I was genuinely excited about. But more important than professional achievements, I had rebuilt my personal life on a foundation of honesty and conscious choice. Marcus and I started dating officially about a year after that coffee shop conversation. It was slow and careful at first, both of us aware that our friendship was too precious to risk on a casual romance. But gradually, that friendship blossomed into something deeper, richer. He saw me completely, knew my entire history, and loved me not in spite of it, but including it. You know what I love most about you? He told me one night as we were cooking dinner together in my Boston apartment. How you've turned your wounds into wisdom. How you use your own pain to help other patients navigate difficult situations. You could have become bitter, closed off, but you chose to become more compassionate. I kissed him gently. I had good examples of what not to be, and eventually some good examples of how to be better. Richard and I now spoke regularly, not just out of obligation, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. He had become a sort of informal consultant as I navigated career decisions, offering perspectives from his own experience as a senior engineer. And, surprisingly, I had become a sort of confidant for him as he worked on being a better, more self-aware person. I started therapy, he told me during one of our weekly calls. I realized I'd been carrying so much anger and resentment for so long, I didn't even know how to be happy. The therapist is helping me unpack it all, to understand why I got so stuck on that one betrayal that I let it define decades of my life. "How is it going?" I asked, proud of him for finally seeking help. "It's hard," he admitted, "confronting all the ways I hurt you, all the opportunities I wasted. But it's also liberating. For the first time, I'm understanding that forgiving your mother, forgiving you for just existing, was never really about you guys. It was about my own inability to accept imperfection, to live with complicated realities." "That's a lot of insight," I observed. "I'm proud of you for doing that work." "It's never too late to grow up," he said with a touch of self-deprecating humor. "Even if it took nearly losing everything, including my life, to finally start." Danny and Jennifer had their baby, a beautiful boy they named Thomas Richard, a name that honored both my biological father and the man who was learning to be a better father. When I visited for the first time and held my nephew, I felt a complex wave of emotion. "Why Thomas?" I asked Danny in private. "Why name him after the man who abandoned Mom?" Danny looked at me with his characteristic gentle wisdom. "Because Thomas Mitchell is part of your story, part of our family story, whether we like it or not. And naming my son partly after him isn't about forgiving him or forgetting that he abandoned you. It's about acknowledging that even flawed people, even people who make terrible choices, are part of who we are. And we can choose to honor the complicated parts of our history without letting them define us." I looked at my brother with new respect. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best," he said with a grin, pulling me into a side hug. "My big sister, who taught me that family is more about choice than blood, more about love than DNA." Richard was a transformed grandfather to little Tommy. Watching him hold that baby with such tenderness, seeing the unconditional love in his eyes, was both beautiful and painful. It was like seeing the father he could have been, should have been. One afternoon, while the whole family was gathered in Portland for Tommy's first birthday, Richard pulled me aside. "I know what you're thinking," he said softly. "I can see it in your eyes when you watch me with Tommy. You're thinking that he's getting the love you should have gotten." "I'm not," I started, but he gently interrupted me. "It's okay to think that. It's okay to feel that. It's true. Tommy is getting a grandfather that you never had as a child, and I'm so sorry for that. I'm sorry I can't go back and give you those years, that love, that support." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I hope that seeing me be better now, even if it's late, gives you some peace. It proves that people can change, even if they can't erase the past. And I hope that when you have your own children one day, I can be the grandfather to them that I should have been a father to you." Tears filled my eyes. "You think I can have that? A family of my own? Kids? All that normal happiness?" "I think you can have anything you choose," he said firmly. "You've already proven that. You turned a difficult childhood into strength. You turned rejection into compassion. You turned pain into purpose. You're going to be an amazing mother one day because you know exactly what not to be, and because you know the value of unconditional love precisely because you had to live without it for so long." That night, Marcus asked me to marry him. It wasn't elaborate or public, just the two of us walking through the Portland neighborhood where I grew up, past the house where I'd spent so many years feeling invisible and unloved. He stopped in front of that house, turned me to face him, and said, "You have transformed so much pain on this journey. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you that you deserve joy too. Marry me, build a family with me. Let me love you the way you always deserved to be loved." I said yes through tears, and for the first time, standing in front of that house that represented so much hurt, I felt only gratitude. Gratitude that I had survived, that I had grown, that I had become someone capable of receiving and giving back healthy love. We were married 6 months later in a small, intimate ceremony in Boston. My mother cried through the whole thing, tears of joy mixed with regret for all the years we'd wasted in family dysfunction. Danny was Marcus's best man, and to my own surprise, I asked Richard to walk me down the aisle. When I asked him, he was completely speechless for a long moment. Are you sure?" he finally managed to ask. "After everything? You still want me to do that?" "You're my father," I said simply. "Not in the traditional way, not without complications or a painful history, but you're the one who finally chose to see me, to know me, to love me, despite all the reasons you had not to. That means something. It means everything." On the day of the wedding, as Richard walked me down the aisle toward Marcus, he whispered, "You are the most extraordinary person I know. That man is lucky you chose him, and I'm the luckiest of all that you chose to give me a second chance." "We all deserve second chances," I whispered back, "as long as we do the work to earn them." The ceremony was beautiful, but the moment that will stay with me was when the officiant asked for someone to give the bride away. Richard stepped forward and said something unplanned, something that came straight from the heart. "No one can give this woman to anyone because she has only ever belonged to herself. Her strength, her compassion, her grace, they are all her own. But I have the privilege of standing beside her today, publicly acknowledging what I should have acknowledged 30 years ago, that she is my daughter, not by blood, but by choice. My choice to finally love her as she always deserved. And now, I bear witness as she chooses Marcus to be her partner, confident that he will see in her what it took me too long to see, that she is a rare and precious gift to anyone lucky enough to be in her life." There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and as Marcus waited for me at the altar, smiling through his own tears, I felt all the pieces of my life finally click into place. The years of pain hadn't vanished or been erased, but they had been transformed, integrated into who I had become, rather than defining me. My honeymoon with Marcus was in Italy. 2 weeks of exploring, incredible food, and finally, just existing in the moment without the weight of history or expectations. But even there, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. "You're thinking about your father," Marcus observed one night as we ate dinner at a small trattoria in Rome. It wasn't a question. He knew me too well. "I'm thinking about both my fathers," I corrected. "About Thomas Mitchell, who gave me life but never knew me, and about Richard, who raised me but took almost 3 decades to really see me, and about how they both, in their different ways, taught me exactly the kind of parent I want to be for my own children one day." Marcus took my hand across the table. "You're going to be amazing. I already know it, because you understand both what is essential and what can do harm, because you know how to love without conditions, how to forgive without forgetting, how to give second chances without being naive about the first ones." "Do you think our kids will understand," I asked, "their mother's complicated history?" "I think we'll teach them that families are complicated and messy, but that love and effort can heal even the deepest wounds. We'll teach them about compassion through your example, about strength through your journey, about forgiveness through your choices." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "I guess that's what I should have been thinking about these past few years. Not so much what was taken from me, but what I gained through the struggle. Resilience, empathy, an understanding of human complexity. I wouldn't have any of that if my life had been easy." "That's true," Marcus agreed, "but it's also okay to acknowledge that you would have preferred it to be easy. That growth doesn't require trauma. You did an amazing job transforming your pain into wisdom, but that doesn't mean the pain was necessary or good. It just means you're remarkable in how you responded to it." His validation touched something deep inside me. For so long, I had felt I needed to be grateful for my difficult childhood because it made me who I was. But Marcus was right. I could acknowledge my growth without glorifying the pain that caused it. We returned to Boston refreshed, ready to start our next chapter, and 3 months later, I found out I was pregnant. Before I continue with the rest of this journey, I want to pause and just say thank you. Thank you for being here, for listening to this story that is so personal, so full of both pain and healing. I know many of you have your own complicated family stories, your own paths of forgiveness and growth, and I want you to know that your stories matter too. If you're in the middle of your own struggle with family, please know you're not alone. Healing isn't linear, forgiveness isn't mandatory, and it's completely okay to protect your heart while still holding out hope. If you want to share your story in the comments, I'll be here to read it. Sometimes we just need to be seen, to be heard, to know that someone understands. And I promise, I understand. I'll continue with the rest of the story in a moment, but first, take a breath, get a glass of water, and know that whatever you're going through, you are stronger than you think. The news of the pregnancy unleashed a storm of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Joy, certainly. Marcus and I were thrilled to be starting our family. But along with the joy came fear, deep and visceral. Fear that I wouldn't know how to be a mother because I'd never experienced unconditional motherly love the way I should have. Fear that I might repeat patterns, that I could hurt my child in the ways I had been hurt. My first call wasn't to my mother or Richard. It was to my therapist, Dr. Isla, Lisa Chen, whom I had started seeing regularly after the transplant. "I'm pregnant," I announced as soon as I walked into her office for our scheduled session, "and I'm terrified." "Tell me about that fear," she said in her characteristic, calm way, and it all came pouring out. Fear of not being good enough, of not knowing how to give my child what I never received. Fear that Richard would reject my baby the way he had rejected me. Fear that I carried intergenerational trauma I would pass on without even realizing it. "These are all valid fears," Dr. Chen said after I finished, "and the fact that you are aware of them, that you're willing to confront them, already puts you ahead of the game. Parents who truly harm their children are usually the ones who never question their own actions, who never examine their own patterns." She leaned forward. "You have spent years processing your trauma, understanding the dynamics that caused it, doing the active work of healing. That doesn't guarantee perfection, but it does guarantee awareness, and awareness is where healthy parenting begins." "But what if it's not enough?" I asked, my voice small. "Then you get help, like you're doing right now. You surround yourself with support. You communicate with your partner. You keep doing the work." She smiled gently. "And you remind yourself that being a good parent doesn't mean being a perfect parent. It means being present, being responsive, being willing to repair when you mess up. All things you have already demonstrated the capacity to do." Gradually, through therapy sessions, conversations with Marcus, and my own internal work, the fear began to morph into something more like determination. I would be the kind of mother I never had. Not perfect, but present. Not flawless, but mindful. Not without struggles, but willing to do the work. I told my family a few weeks later. My mother's reaction was immediate tears of joy. Danny swept me into a careful hug, mindful that I was still in the delicate first trimester. But it was Richard's reaction that surprised me most. He said nothing at first, just stood there with tears streaming down his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I'm going to be a grandfather again," he said in wonder. "And this time, I'm going to get it right from the beginning. I'm going to love this child unconditionally, the way I should have loved you from day one." "I know you will," I said gently. "And you know what means the most? That I'll get to see my child grow up with the kind of grandfather you're becoming, not the kind of father you were. This child will get the best of you, and that's its own kind of redemption." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I can promise you one thing. I'm going to tell this child stories about you, about how strong you were even as a little girl, how smart you were, how compassionate you were. I'm going to make sure your child knows they have an extraordinary mother, and I'm going to make sure you hear those things too, because you should have heard them a long time ago." The pregnancy progressed relatively smoothly, despite the natural medical concerns about my previous nephrectomy. My doctors monitored me closely, but my remaining kidney was functioning perfectly, compensating just as healthy kidneys do. It was a testament to the resilience of the human body, and as a nephrologist, I found a professional fascination in my own physiology. Marcus was incredible throughout the pregnancy. He came to every doctor's appointment, held my hair back when morning sickness hit, read parenting books, and highlighted passages for us to discuss. But most importantly, he let me voice my fears without judgment. "What if I don't know how to soothe the baby when she cries?" I asked one night, lying in bed with his hands on my growing belly. "What if my maternal instincts are broken because I never saw them modeled properly?" "Then we'll learn together," he said simply. "And there will be hard nights and moments of uncertainty, but we'll have each other. And unlike your childhood, our child will have two present, engaged parents who communicate and work as a team." He kissed my forehead. Besides, you care for patients every single day with compassion and skill. Your heart knows how to nurture, even if your childhood experience didn't teach you. Trust who you've become, not just who you were forced to be. In my second trimester, something unexpected happened. I received an email from an account I didn't recognize with the subject line, "From Thomas Mitchell." My heart stopped. For years, I had let the idea of my biological father remain abstract, something I knew about but had never felt compelled to explore. Now, he was contacting me. With trembling hands, I opened the email. "Dear Sarah, you don't know me, but your father, Richard Morrison, contacted me a few months ago. He explained the situation, told me about the transplant, about how you saved his life despite everything, and he gave me your contact information, leaving it up to me to decide whether to reach out. I have spent months staring at your email address, writing and deleting drafts, trying to find words that could possibly explain or excuse the inexcusable. There are no such words. I abandoned you and your mother when you were just a possibility, not yet a real person. I was scared, immature, selfish. I used all the classic excuses. Too young, not ready, a career to build. But the truth is simply that I was a coward. I'm not reaching out to ask for forgiveness or to suddenly insert myself into your life. I have no right to either of those things. But when Richard told me you are expecting your first child, I felt I owed you at least what I can offer, medical history. I've attached complete medical records for myself and my immediate family. You're a doctor, so you'll understand the importance of this for your own health and that of your child. There's a history of heart disease on my father's side, a few instances of type 2 diabetes, nothing seriously alarming, but information you should have. I've also attached a few photos of myself when I was young. Your mother never had any, and I thought you might want to see where half your genetics came from. If you never reply to this email, I will completely understand. You owe me nothing, not acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not connection. I made my choice 30 years ago, and you have every right to make yours now. But if you ever want to know anything, to ask questions, to understand your biological history, I will be here. Not as a father, I lost that right a long time ago, but as someone who carries profound regret and even more profound respect for the person you've become despite my absence. Richard spoke of you with such pride, such admiration. He told me about your medical career, about your compassion, about how you saved him when you had every reason to turn your back. He said you are the most extraordinary person he knows, and I believe him. I'm so sorry I never had the courage to know you. It is my deepest loss. With respect and regret, Thomas Mitchell. Reading that email unleashed a storm of emotions I hadn't expected. Not anger, surprisingly, not a longing for a lost father, but something more like closure, as if a piece I didn't know was missing had finally clicked into place. I showed the email to Marcus first, then to Dr. Chen at our next session. "How do you feel about this?" Dr. Chen asked. "Strangely peaceful," I admitted. For years, there was this shadowy figure in my story, the man who raised me but didn't love me, and the man who created me but abandoned me. Now, they are both stepping out of the shadows, acknowledging their failings, offering what they can. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Thomas isn't asking to be my father. He's not trying to insert himself into my life or claim some connection he hasn't earned. He's just taking accountability in a way that took Richard decades to do, and there's something respectable in that. "Are you going to respond?" Dr. Chen asked. "I think so. Not to start a relationship, but to acknowledge his outreach, to get the medical information that will be important for my child, and maybe to close that chapter for good, not with anger or resentment, but with the simple acknowledgement that we both moved on a long time ago." It took me a week to compose my reply. "Thomas, thank you for the medical information and the photos. As a doctor, I appreciate having a complete family history for reference. You are right that you owe me nothing, and I expected nothing from you. I made my peace a long time ago with the fact that you chose not to be a part of my life. That choice hurt me when I was young, but it also taught me to build my strength from within, to not rely on external validation to know my own worth. Richard and I have a complicated relationship that took decades and a kidney transplant to begin to heal, but we are doing the work, both committed to moving forward. I respect that you contacted him and gave him the choice of whether to pass on your information to me. It shows a consideration that I appreciate. I am not interested in building a relationship with you, not out of anger or punishment, but simply because I already have the family I need, chosen and biological, complicated but committed. Adding another layer of complexity while I am about to become a mother does not serve my well-being. But I accept your regret, and I hope you find peace with your choices, just as I have found peace with their consequences. Sometimes the best thing we can do for each other is to acknowledge the harm we caused and then give everyone the space to heal. Thank you for giving me that space while still offering what you can. It is more than many would do, and that is not lost on me. Wishing you well, Sarah Morrison Chen. Sending that email felt like releasing the last bit of weight I had been carrying. Thomas Mitchell was no longer an unanswered question or an open wound. He was just a man who had made choices that impacted my life, choices I had processed and integrated, and now we could both move on with a clear understanding of where we stood. Richard was curious about my interaction with Thomas. "Did he contact you?" he asked during one of our weekly calls. "He did," I confirmed, and I replied, "but I made it clear I'm not interested in a relationship. I have enough fathers in my life," I added with a touch of humor. I could hear the emotion in his voice. "That means something to me, more than you can imagine." "I know," I said gently. "And Richard, thank you for giving him my information, but leaving the choice with me. It shows you respect my autonomy in ways you haven't always. That's growth." "I'm trying," he said simply. "Every day, I'm trying to be better." I know, and it shows. The third trimester brought on intense nesting and final preparations. Marcus and I transformed our spare room into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and assembling furniture with the occasional and hilarious help of Danny, who flew out from Portland for a weekend. "You're going to be an amazing mom," Danny said as we put the crib together. "And your kid is so lucky to have you." "How do you know?" I asked, my vulnerability showing through. "How do you know I won't pass on the trauma I experienced?" Danny stopped what he was doing and looked at me seriously. "Because I've watched you spend your whole life breaking cycles. You could have become bitter and closed off, but you chose to be compassionate. You could have rejected Richard when he needed you, but you chose compassion. You could have let your difficult childhood define you, but you chose to grow beyond it." He took my hand. "That baby is going to have a mother who understands the importance of presence, of validation, of unconditional love, precisely because you know what it's like to grow up without those things. You will do better because you know exactly what not to do." His words stayed with me as I neared my due date, and when labor began on a clear September morning, I felt fear and excitement mixed in equal measure. Marcus was by my side through every contraction, breathing with me, encouraging me, being exactly the partner I always knew he would be. And when our daughter finally arrived after 18 hours of labor, when they placed her in my arms for the first time, I felt something inside me fundamentally shift. I looked down at that tiny, perfect face, at those eyes that looked up at me with absolute trust, and I understood in a visceral instant what Richard had missed out on. The pure, simple joy of loving a child without conditions, without reservations, without complications. The privilege of being chosen, needed, trusted completely. "Hi, Lily," I whispered, the name we had picked out together. "I'm your mom, and I'm going to spend every day of my life showing you how loved you are, how wanted you are, how much of a gift your existence is." Marcus was crying, his arm around me as we admired our daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's everything," I agreed. The first few days with Lily were simultaneously the hardest and most rewarding of my life. As predicted by most parenting books, I slept little, worried constantly, and second-guessed every decision I made. But through it all, there was this undercurrent of pure joy that I had never experienced before. Every time I held Lily, every time she quieted at my touch or nursed in my arms, I felt something inside me healing. The parts of me that had been rejected and unloved were being patched back together by the simple act of giving unconditional love to this tiny child. "You're a natural at this," Marcus observed one night as I was rocking Lily to sleep. "For someone who was so worried about not knowing how to be a mother, you're incredibly intuitive." "It doesn't feel intuitive," I admitted. "It feels like I'm constantly guessing, worried I'm doing it all wrong." "Welcome to parenthood," he said with a grin. "But seriously, Sarah, you're amazing. The way you respond to her, the way you read her, the way you're so present, it's all exactly what she needs." My mother came to stay with us for 2 weeks after Lily was born, helping with meals and housework while I recovered and learned to navigate motherhood. There were awkward moments between us, her offering advice that sometimes contradicted my own instincts, me having to set boundaries in ways I never had before. "You don't have to pick her up every time she cries," she said one day when Lily was fussy. "Sometimes babies need to learn to self-soothe." "I respect that that worked for you," I said firmly, "but current research on child development shows that consistently responding to an infant's needs actually builds security and long-term independence, so I'm going to keep picking up my daughter when she needs me." To my mother's credit, she backed down gracefully. "You're her mother. You know best." That simple acknowledgement that I was the mother, that my choices mattered, that my instincts were valid, meant more than she probably realized. It was the kind of validation I had never received growing up, the kind of respect I had had to learn to demand as an adult. Richard came to visit when Lily was 3 weeks old. I watched carefully as he held her for the first time, looking for any sign of the rejection he had shown me. Instead, I saw only pure wonder. "She has your eyes," he said softly, looking from Lily to me, "and I hope she has your strength, your compassion, your incredible capacity to forgive." "She'll have her own choices about who to become," I replied. "Our job is just to love her while she figures it out." He nodded, still fixated on Lily's face. "Can I tell you something? When Danny was born, I felt this instant, overwhelming love. And I know now that part of what made that easy was that he validated my ego, proof of my manhood, my lineage, my legacy. It was love, but it was tangled up with all these ego issues." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But holding Lily now, loving her without any of those ego complications, I finally understand what I missed with you. The pure joy of just loving a child because she exists, because she is precious, because her presence enriches the world. It didn't have to be about DNA or ego or any of the things I let get in the way. It just had to be about love." Tears filled my eyes. "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for doing the work to get to that understanding, even if it took so long." "It's never too late," he said, echoing words he'd said before. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that, to you, to Lily, to myself." In the months that followed, watching Richard with Lily was simultaneously healing and painful. Healing because I saw that change was truly possible, that people could grow and transform. Painful because every gentle interaction between them was a reminder of what I didn't have. "It's okay to feel both," Dr. Chen reminded me during one of our ongoing sessions. "Joy for your daughter and grief for your child self. Gratitude for Richard's change and pain that it took so long. These emotions are not contradictory. They are complex, just like your entire family history." Lily thrived in her first few months of life, hitting every milestone with a determination that reminded me of myself. But it was when she started to smile, really smile, with recognition and joy, that something inside me shifted completely. I was changing her diaper one ordinary morning, singing silly songs and making funny faces, when she locked eyes with me and broke into the most radiant, full-bodied grin. It wasn't just reflexed or gas. It was genuine connection, genuine delight in my presence. And in that moment, I understood viscerally what I had missed in my childhood. Not just love or acceptance in the abstract sense, but this precise mutual recognition, this joy in seeing and being seen. The way Lily looked at me with pure delight, as if I were the most wonderful person in her world, that is what every child should have. That is what I should have had. I cried on that changing table, holding my daughter as she looked at me in confusion, her tiny hands reaching for my wet face. "I'm sorry, baby," I whispered. "Mommy's just feeling a lot of things. But they're good things, I promise. I'm here, always here." Marcus found me like that a few minutes later, gently guided me to the rocking chair where I could hold Lily while I processed what I was feeling. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. "I am," I assured him. "It's just, she looked at me with so much love, Marcus, such pure, unconditional love. And I realized I never experienced that growing up. Richard never looked at me like that. And instead of making me feel sad, it made me feel overwhelming gratitude that I get to give this to her, that I can break that cycle completely." He kissed my forehead. "You already have. Just by the way you hold her, how you respond to her, how you're so completely present. You're already exactly what she needs." When Lily was 6 months old, Danny and Jennifer announced they were expecting their second child. The whole family gathered in Portland for a celebration, and for the first time in my memory, our family gathering was genuinely joyous. No underlying tension, no unspoken resentments, just people who had done the work of healing and could now enjoy each other's company. Richard spent the entire evening on the floor playing with Tommy and Lily, his patience endless as he built block towers for Tommy to knock down and made silly faces to make Lily laugh. Watching him, I felt something inside me finally let go. Forgiveness. Real forgiveness. Not just the intellectual decision to move on, but a genuine emotional release of the resentment I had carried for so long. He couldn't go back and be the father I needed as a child, but he was doing the work to be a better person now, and that had to be enough. That night, after the kids were in bed and the other adults were in the living room chatting, I found Richard alone on the back deck, his favorite spot for deep conversations. "Can I join you?" I asked. "Always," he said, making room for me to sit beside him. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the stars. Then I said the words I had been rehearsing in my mind for months, but had never found the courage to say out loud. "I forgive you," I said simply. "For everything. For the DNA test, for the rejection, for the years of making me feel not good enough. Not because you deserve forgiveness or because it erases the damage, but because I'm tired of carrying that weight, and because I see you doing the work to be better, and that means something." Richard turned to look at me, tears already welling in his eyes. "Sarah." "Let me finish," I said gently. "Forgiving you doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It means choosing that I'm not going to let that pain define our relationship from now on. It means choosing to see who you are becoming instead of only who you were." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "There will still be hard moments, moments when a childhood memory stings or when I need to set a boundary because old patterns try to reemerge. But I want to face those moments as someone who has forgiven, not as someone still trapped in resentment." He was crying openly now, not trying to hide or wipe away the tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, not even close, but I'm grateful for it more than words can say. And I promise to keep doing the work, to keep being better, to keep proving that change is possible." "I know you will," I said. "And Richard, thank you. Thank you for eventually choosing to see me. Thank you for saving me when I donated that kidney, not just physically, but emotionally. Thank you for finally being honest about your failings. And thank you for giving me a chance to have the father I always needed, even if it came decades late." We hugged, and it was different from previous hugs, not awkward or hesitant, but genuine. The embrace of two people who had been through fire together and come out the other side, not perfect, but honest, not unscarred, but healed. When we pulled apart, he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When Lily is old enough to understand, will you tell her our story, the real story, with all the complexity and pain, but also with the redemption?" I thought carefully about his question. I will tell her an age-appropriate version when she's old enough to understand, because I think there are valuable lessons in it about forgiveness, second chances, and the importance of doing the work to be better. I smiled slightly, but I'm also going to make sure she always, from day one, knows she is loved unconditionally, that she never has to earn love or prove her worth, that her existence alone is gift enough. As it should have been for you, he said quietly. As it should have been for me, I agreed. But here's the thing, I can't change my past, but I can create a different future for Lily. And in that, your rejection paradoxically becomes a gift. Because I know exactly what not to be. I know precisely what she needs, in ways I never would have if I'd had a perfect childhood. Richard shook his head slowly. You've transformed your trauma into wisdom, your pain into compassion. He trailed off, struggling with emotion. I'm grateful my terrible failings didn't destroy you, that you chose to grow beyond them. It wasn't always a choice, I corrected gently. There were years when I was just surviving. But eventually, with therapy and support and a lot of internal work, I was able to choose growth over bitterness. And I hope to teach Lily that when life hurts us, and it will, because that's part of being human, we can choose how we respond. As we walked back inside, where the laughter and chatter of family awaited, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete peace with my story. Not because it was pretty or painless, but because I had turned it into something meaningful. I had taken rejection and learned compassion. I had taken abandonment and learned strength. I had taken a broken relationship and, through immense work on both sides, built something new from scratch. Richard didn't say I was his real daughter that day in the hospital when we finally confronted the truth. But now, watching him laugh with my mother and play with his grandchildren, I saw that he had become a father in the ways that mattered. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but genuinely, with his whole heart. And I had become a daughter in the ways that mattered too, not because DNA dictated it, but because we had both chosen to do the work of building a connection, even when it was hard, even when it would have been easier to give up. Later that night, as Marcus and I put Lily to bed at my parents' house, I paused to admire her sleeping. She was so peaceful, so confident in her sleep, completely secure in the knowledge that she would be cared for. You know what's the most beautiful thing about her? I whispered to Marcus. She will never know a version of me that was broken. She'll never see the woman who questioned her own worth or begged for scraps of affection. She will only ever know a mother who loves her fiercely, unconditionally, completely. And she'll never fully understand what a gift that is, Marcus whispered back, because for her, it will just be normal, the way it always was, the way it will always be. I smiled in the semi-darkness, exactly as it should be. Our job of breaking cycles is successful when our children don't even realize there were cycles to be broken. On the drive back to Boston the next day, with Lily asleep in her car seat in the back, I found myself reflecting on the whole journey. From the moment I heard Richard say I wasn't really his daughter, through the years of rejection and pain, through the decision to donate a kidney, through the slow, arduous work of building a real relationship, to now, to forgiveness. You're quiet, Marcus observed as he drove. What are you thinking about? About how life rarely gives us clean stories, I said. About how I used to wish my story was about a father who always loved me and a family that was always functional. But the story I have is about a father who learned to love me, about a family that did the work to heal, about a woman who chose compassion over bitterness. I paused, watching the landscape go by. And you know what? I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade the years of pain or the hard work, because they made me who I am. They taught me what really matters. They showed me that change is possible, even when it feels impossible. Marcus took my hand, and most importantly, I continued with a smile, it showed me that sometimes the greatest gifts we receive are the ones we have to fight fiercely to create for ourselves. Richard didn't give me unconditional love when I was born, but eventually, painfully, we created something precious from scratch, and that is worth more than anything that could have come easily. We arrived home as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. As I carried a sleeping Lily inside, feeling her precious weight in my arms, I thought about the generations of women before me, each carrying their own traumas, their own complicated stories. My mother had done the best she could with the tools she had. I was doing better with the tools I had collected through therapy, awareness, and hard internal work. And Lily would have even better tools because she would have a foundation of unconditional love from day one. That night, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, I wrote a letter to her, not to give her now, but to save until she was old enough to understand. My dearest Lily, when you read this, you will be old enough to understand that families are complicated, that people make mistakes, that love doesn't always come easily or perfectly. So I want to tell you about your history, not just the story of your birth, but the story of the generations before you who struggled and healed so that you could have the childhood I had to fight to create for you. Your grandfather Richard was not always the loving man you know. There was a time when rejection and wounded pride blinded him to love. But he did the work to change, to become someone capable of unconditional love. Your presence in his life is rooted in that transformation. Your grandmother Rebecca made choices that complicated everything, but she also gave me life, raised me with the love she knew how to give, and eventually found the courage to support a healing relationship between Richard and me. And I, your mother, spent years carrying the pain of rejection before I learned that I could choose how to respond to that pain. I chose compassion. I chose growth. I chose forgiveness. Not because it was easy, but because I refused to let someone else's pain turn me into someone I didn't want to be. You were born into a family that has done the work to heal, where every adult in your life has chosen to face their own failings, where love is not perfect, but it is genuine, where second chances are given because we all need them. When you grow up, there may be times when you need to forgive someone who has hurt you. When that happens, I want you to know forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the pain wasn't real. It means choosing not to let that pain define you. It means acknowledging someone's flawed humanity while protecting your own heart. And if you ever become a mother yourself, I hope you will simply love your children the way I have always loved you, with my whole heart, without conditions, without reservations. Because that is what you have always deserved, it is what every child deserves, and it is the most precious gift we can give to the next generation. You are loved, my sweet girl. You always were, always will be. Not because you've earned it, or because you've proven your worth, simply because you exist. With all my heart. Your mother. I folded the letter carefully and put it in an envelope that I would keep in a safe place until she was ready. It was my story, our family's story, but it was also a legacy. Proof that cycles can be broken, that relationships can be healed, that love can win even when everything seems lost. Marcus found me sitting at the desk, the envelope in my hand. For Lily, he asked. For when she's ready to understand where she came from. For when she needs to know that families can be messy but still worth fighting for. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin on my shoulder. You know she's going to have the best mother, right? Someone who understands both the value of presence and the cost of absence. Someone who knows exactly what a child needs because she remembers exactly what she missed. I hope so, I whispered. I hope the years of pain are worth something if they mean I can give her the childhood I never had. It's already worth it, he assured me. It's already worth it because you've turned trauma into wisdom, pain into compassion, rejection into the ability to love more deeply. Lily is lucky to have you, and Richard finally understands how lucky he is too. In the months and years that followed, I watched Lily grow into a confident, secure child. She hit milestones and explored the world with a fearless curiosity that only comes from knowing you are deeply loved. There was no hesitation in her, no need to prove her worth or earn affection. She was simply herself, completely and wonderfully. Richard was a devoted grandfather, showing up for every recital, every game, every important moment. And in quiet moments, he would sometimes look at me with an expression I recognized as regret mixed with gratitude. Regret for what he lost with me, gratitude for a second chance with Lily. She's so much like you were, he told me once, watching Lily play. curious, determined, so smart. Except she has a confidence that you had to build on your own, because she's always known she was loved." That was always the difference, I agreed. And that's why it's all worth it. All the work, all the pain, all the effort to heal, so that she never has to question her worth the way I questioned mine. When Lily was 3, Richard was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Unrelated to the kidney, the doctors assured us, just bad luck. The treatment was aggressive but effective, and he went into remission after 6 months. But the experience of facing mortality again brought another round of deep reflection. "Every extra day I have is a gift from you," he told me during his recovery. "The kidney you gave me these years. It gave me the chance to know Lily, to be the grandfather I never was a father, to make my peace with you. Without it, I would have died 6 years ago, with so much unresolved, so much love ungiven." "But you didn't die," I reminded him gently. "You lived, and you've used that time well. That's all that matters now." As Lily grew, I began to tell her age-appropriate versions of our family story. When she was 5 and asked why she only had one Grandpa Mitchell, but 2 grandpas on Daddy's side, I explained in simple terms that families come in all shapes, that sometimes adults make mistakes, but work hard to fix them. Her eyes filled with tears. "How did you decide?" I asked myself, will I regret it more to donate and possibly suffer complications, or to not donate and live with that what if? For me, the answer was clear, but it might be different for you, and both answers are valid. We talked for another 20 minutes, and when she left, I saw a relief in her face, not because she had made a decision, but because she had been given permission to make the choice that was right for her, whatever that might be. This became part of my mission, to use my story not to prescribe specific actions, but to validate the complexity of family decisions, to give people permission to prioritize their own health while still holding compassion. When Lily was 10, she came to me with a question I had been expecting but dreading. "Mommy, I was talking to Grandpa Richard about family history, and he said something weird. He said it took him a while to realize you were really his daughter. What did he mean?" Marcus and I had discussed this moment, preparing for when it came. I sat Lily down, took a deep breath, and began to tell her the age-appropriate version of our complicated story. I told her about how sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt people, how Grandpa Richard let his pride and hurt stop him from loving me the way he should have, how he got sick and needed a kidney, and how I chose to help even when I didn't have to, and how that choice started the process of healing our relationship. Lily listened intently, her face serious. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That must have hurt a lot," she finally said, "not being loved when you were a kid." "It did," I admitted, "but you know what I learned? That pain doesn't have to define you. It can teach you instead. It taught me the kind of mother I wanted to be, the kind of love I wanted to give you and James." "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said, and hugged me tight. "Thank you, sweetie. But you know what's the most beautiful part? You will never have to experience that. You will always know you are loved, always, no matter what. That's the gift the pain gave me, knowing exactly how to make sure you never feel the way I felt." She pulled back and looked at me with those wise eyes that sometimes seemed too old for her 10-year-old face. "Do you think Grandpa Richard really changed, or is he just being nice now?" "I think he really changed," I said honestly, "but the change didn't happen overnight. It took years of hard work, therapy, facing his own failings. Real change is possible, but it takes effort." "I'm glad he changed," she said, "because I love Grandpa. But I'm also glad you were strong enough to survive when he hadn't changed yet." Her wisdom astounded me. "You're an amazing kid, you know that?" She grinned. "I learned from the best." That conversation marked a turning point in my own healing process. Telling the story to my daughter, seeing her understanding and compassion, feeling her unconditional love was a final release of any lingering pain I had been carrying. It was no longer about what I had lost. It was about what I had created, about the family we had built, the love we chose to give, the cycles we had deliberately broken. Years passed, bringing the typical joys and challenges of any family life. Lily grew into a confident teenager who knew her own worth. James came into his own, quiet but deeply thoughtful. Marcus and I navigated parenthood with the open communication and mutual respect we modeled for our children. Richard aged gracefully, the kidney I donated still functioning well 2 decades later. He and I developed a relationship that was authentically loving, built on a foundation of honesty and hard work. It wasn't a traditional father-daughter relationship, but it was ours, earned through effort on both sides. One evening, about 25 years after the transplant, Richard called me. He was having one of his reflective days, moments when the past weighed more heavily. "I was thinking today," he said, "about how much time I wasted. 28 years of your life when I could have loved you, but chose not to." "Richard," I began, but he gently interrupted. "Let me finish. I was thinking about those lost years, and I realized something. I can't get them back. No amount of being a good grandfather or a better father now erases those years. But what I can do, what I have been trying to do, is live every remaining day in a way that honors the gift you gave me." His voice grew thick with emotion. "You gave me life when I was dying. But more than that, you gave me a chance to be better, to grow, to learn what really matters. And I have tried every single day not to waste that gift." "I know," I said softly, "and I see it. We all see it." "I love you," he said. Words we said easily now, but that had taken decades to come naturally. Not because I have to, or because I'm trying to make up for the past, but because I genuinely, deeply love who you are, and I'm grateful every day that you're in my life. "I love you too," I replied, "and I'm grateful for the journey, as painful as it was, because it brought us here, to this place of honesty and real connection." When I hung up the phone, Marcus found me with tears streaming down my face. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern in his eyes. "Everything's okay," I assured him, "better than okay. Just reflecting on how far we've come, how different it all could have been." He held me, and we stood like that, wrapped in the silence of our home where our children slept safely, where love wasn't complicated or conditional, where mistakes were acknowledged and forgiven, where growth was celebrated. "You did it," he whispered. "You broke the cycle. You gave our children the childhood you never had." "We did it," I corrected, "together, and with the help of flawed people who were willing to do the work to change." That night, lying in bed, listening to Marcus's quiet breathing beside me, I thought about the long road from my childhood, marked by rejection, to this moment of deep peace. I thought about Richard, about Thomas Mitchell, about my mother, about all the imperfect people who had shaped my story. And I realized that I was finally, completely at peace with it all. Not because it was pretty or unscarred, but because it was mine. My story, my journey, my choices about how to respond to what life gave me. Richard didn't say I was really his daughter until he needed my kidney to survive. But over the years that followed, we both proved that family isn't about DNA or blood or perfect circumstances. It's about choice, effort, and deliberate love, even when it's hard. And in the end, that's what matters. Not the flawed beginning, but the work we did to create something genuine from the chaos. Not the original rejection, but the eventual forgiveness. Not the inherited trauma, but the deliberately broken cycles. I am Richard Morrison's daughter not because genetics say so, but because we both chose it. Because he finally did the work to see me. Because I forgave even when I didn't have to. Because we built something real from the ruins of a broken relationship. And that choice, that hard-won love, that connection, built brick by brick through hard work and honesty, turned out to be worth more than anything that could have come easily. My kidney saved his life. But his choice to finally see me, to love me, to do the work to change, saved something in me too. It freed me from a lifelong search for validation, freed me to simply exist, whole and complete, with or without his approval. And that, in the end, is the most valuable gift of all. "Was Grandpa Richard always your grandpa?" she asked, tilting her head the way she did when she was thinking deeply. "He was always the man who raised me," I said carefully, "but it took him a long time to learn how to really be my father. Sometimes people have to learn how to love, even grown-ups. But he loves you now? She pressed. Yes, sweetie, he loves me now, and he has always loved you from the moment you were born. She thought about that for a moment, then smiled. It's okay that it took a long time. Mommy always says it's okay to make mistakes if you fix them. My heart swelled. That's exactly right, baby. Exactly right. When Lily was 7, Marcus and I gave her a baby brother. James arrived with less drama than his sister, and watching Lily with him, so gentle, so protective, so instantly loving, felt like yet another confirmation that the cycles were truly broken. She knew nothing of sibling rivalry, nothing of competing for affection or conditional love. She just loved her brother because he existed. Richard held James with the same wonder he had shown with Lily. 2 grandchildren, he said in awe. 2 chances to give the love I failed to give the first time around. You're giving it now, I assured him, and that counts. It really counts. In the years that followed, our family thrived in ways I never would have imagined possible during those dark years of my childhood. Not because we were perfect, we still had challenges, still had hard moments, but because we had built a foundation of honesty and a commitment to growth. Danny and Jennifer had their second child, a girl named Sarah Rebecca, which made me cry when they told me the name. For your strength, Danny explained, and for Mom's resilience, both flawed but with love. My career in nephrology flourished. I became a recognized expert in transplant ethics, often giving talks about my personal experiences with donation and how to navigate complex family relationships. My story resonated with so many others who had faced similar situations: imperfect families, complicated loves, hard-won second chances. One day, while I was speaking at a medical conference about living organ donation and family dynamics, a young doctor approached me during a break. Dr. Morrison-Chan, she said nervously, your story about donating a kidney to your father, it resonated with me so deeply. My mother needs a kidney, but our relationship is complicated. She wasn't kind to me growing up, and I'm struggling with whether I should get tested. I sat with her, remembering myself years ago making that same impossible decision. Can I tell you what I learned? I offered, and she nodded eagerly. The decision to donate shouldn't come from obligation or guilt. It should come from a place of self-empowerment, choosing to do a hard thing for your own reasons, not because someone expects it of you. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. For me, donating wasn't about giving my father what he deserved. It was about choosing the kind of person I wanted to be. But that was my choice, and it might not be the right one for you, and that's okay. You are not any less compassionate or loving if you decide that protecting your own health and emotional well-being is the priority.